This video is going to ruffle some feathers, but I'm making it because there's nothing more dangerous than taking advice from people who hate you for what you are. Let's start by talking about something that most of us have known for a long time.
I'm sure that there's some feminists in the crowd right now. You know what? You're full of shit.
But we're told feminism just means equality, treating women like equal human beings with the same legal rights as men. Who could possibly object to that? You must really hate women if you speak against feminism, because feminism just means equality, right? Does it though? Does it really? Many years ago, I labeled myself as a male feminist because I supported, and I continue to support to this day, equality of opportunity for both men and women. But I no longer associate myself with that label, because what seems to happen in reality is kind of a bait and switch. People sign up for supporting equality and get something else. And what is this something else? Well, I don't intend this to be a full litany of all the ways that prove this to be the case, but instead I just want to start by pointing out one recent example that I'm still seeing going around on my social media feeds, having been shared by many feminist pages without any major pushback from within the feminist community. So I think we can say that this is a pretty good representation of the actual views of actual feminists. It said, "The solution to male loneliness is literally being a better person." Because of course, the only reason someone might be lonely is because they're a shitty human being. Meanwhile, what type of man gets a lot of female attention? They must all be really wonderful men, full of integrity, with great character and great morals, right? Right? This is Jeremy Meeks. He is a convicted criminal with multiple convictions against his name. In 2014, he was arrested on weapons charges, and his photo was put up on the police department's website. And according to Wikipedia, within 24 hours from when the photos were posted to the police department's page, Meeks' photo had acquired more than 15,000 likes and 3,700 comments, mostly from women enamored with his looks. Not so lonely then. It is not being a better person that prevents male loneliness. There are plenty of shitty men out there getting lots of attention from women. Some women are even attracted to that very same shittiness, but they lack the self-awareness to question why they don't hold themselves to higher standards and instead put all the responsibility and focus on the man that they chose. And what happens when a man focuses on all the nice characteristics that feminists say that he should? Well, things don't usually go so well for him.
So I just left a restaurant after waiting 30 minutes for a date to show up, and apparently I got stood up. I don't know what to say. Like, I'm trying to do everything right to be a gentleman. I brought flowers. I've been consistent talking with this girl for 2 weeks, trying to get to know what she likes, what she doesn't like. I made plans. I picked the restaurant, the day and the time. You know, I've done everything to be just the kind of guy that would value somebody's time. Like, I'm just looking for my person.
This isn't to say that being patient, generous, kind, and loving are not good traits to have in a relationship. They're just simply not what drives sexual attraction. And millions of women are choosing men who lack those nice traits because the sexually attractive traits are much more important to them. And you can't nice your way into sexual attraction. And this isn't something to judge anyone for. If we hadn't evolved this way, human beings would not have survived as a species. The ability to stand up for oneself, to be able to fight and protect, without these traits, our ancestors would have died out. So for those of us who want to be good people and also attractive to women, we need to be building those universally sexually attractive traits as well. I recently went to see the Barbie movie, which, according to its director and several members of its cast, was meant to be a feminist movie. In the movie, Barbieland is meant to be the inverse of the real world. So the Kens, the men, are a servant class, while the Barbies are in charge. And when Ken discovers the real world, he's surprised to be treated with respect. He's inspired by scenes of men working together, building and achieving. But we also see the writer's understanding of the world being run by a thinly veiled patriarchy, which men will openly admit to if you just push them into talking about it. Ken decides to bring that patriarchy back into Barbieland, and Barbieland swings from being a feminist totalitarian state into an absolute patriarchy. And not only do the Kens prefer this, but so do the Barbies. And unlike the Kens' exclusion as accessories to be forgotten about in a feminist Barbie land, in patriarchal Kendom, the Barbies are invited to live with the Kens, who included them in their lives, take interest in their perspectives, share with them their hobbies, and sing to them out of adoration. In Barbie land, empathy and value only went one way, from the Kens to the Barbies, and in Kendom it was shared. Note, the only ones who had a problem with this were the ugly, weird Barbies and the androgynous and spineless Allens. Later, they team up and brainwash the Barbies back into their feminist mindset with a monologue on how difficult it is to be a woman, a definitively one-sided and unnuanced monologue at that, and the Barbies reclaim power using deceit and manipulation, by turning the Kens against each other, using their love against them. And this is how we see the feminist victory being achieved: deceit, manipulation, and one-sided talking points. And then the writers are all of a sudden shocked at how people see Ken as this flawed, well-intentioned but tragic hero. Where the writers saw nothing wrong with their ridiculous ideas of the world and of what feminist victory would look like, many people saw that explicit retelling as containing its own refutation. Feminism in practice, in what it champions, in what gets shared, in the movies that get made, is its own satire. One of the most regular pieces of feminist rhetoric that we see is that men are the ones who are committing acts of violence far more than women. But this would be obvious. Men as a group are far better at violence than women, be it for aggression or for protection. And while women worry more about it, statistically, men are more often the victims of violent crime than women. And when this is pointed out, it's become so very commonplace for some feminists to say, as if it was a great mic drop moment, yeah, but who does the violence? It's just other men. But I don't find that to be a very impressive argument, and I don't think you should either, because as I said, men are the effective practitioners of violence. If you want someone to commit violence, find a man. If you want to find someone to protect you from violence, you also need a man. And I think this argument reveals something about how feminism operates in practice. Men are not seen as individual human beings, but part of some great man club that conspires together to make decisions, even if those decisions don't actually help most men.
So that's my idea of the patriarchy, which is a system of male dominance of society.
Yeah, but that's not my sense of the patriarchy.
So what's yours?
Well, in what sense is our society male-dominated?
The fact that the vast majority of wealth is owned by men, the vast majority of capital is owned by men. Women do more unpaid labour.
A very tiny proportion of men, and a huge proportion of people who are seriously disaffected are men. Most people in prison are men. Most people who are on the street are men. Most victims of violent crime are men. Most people who commit suicide are men. Most people who die in wars are men. People who do worse in school are men. It's like, where's the dominance here precisely? What you're doing is you're taking a tiny substrata of hyper-successful men and using that to represent the entire structure of Western society. There's nothing about that that's vaguely appropriate.
Seeing men only as a group rather than as individuals allows someone to punish any man for the sins of any other man. They try to make men living now pay for the privilege of their forefathers, privileges which were not really used to oppress, but more often to protect women in a harsh and brutal natural world. And these feminists are absolutely blind to the struggles of real men. For them, the monologue that we saw in the movie of one-sided talking points is the whole truth. The struggles they face in their own life are what make them the true victims. And it's an incredibly narcissistic point of view, because it just means that the struggles of people outside of your group either don't matter or just don't exist to you.
When I was, living in England and working around English environment and stuff, there was such a desire. What I found with feminists, and particularly in the English environment, there's no specimen of human being that is more privileged than the English white woman. In my experience, there's no human on this planet that is more privileged than the English white woman. And when I used to see how much they would complain about the oppression they experienced, and I just thought to myself, you definitely still have more rights than somebody like my father, who's got a bit of an accent and he's definitely Muslim and stuff like that. You definitely have more of a privilege than him. And you definitely have more of a privilege than, the Caribbean guys or the Nigerian guys or the Muslim guys. When you go to the airport, you definitely have a privilege. But because people are so almost dying to be a victim they would complain about such small things.
Ultimately, I think your take on this comes down to whether you see empathy as a zero-sum game. Do you think if men make progress in one area, that means that women lose? The loudest, most widespread feminism on social media is based on the idea that if men win, women lose. And ultimately, that's why it fails to be about equality. Instead, in feminism's loudest, most seen and heard real-world form, it's an us versus them tribalism which, if we applied it to any other group, would be rightly recognized as bigotry. Demanding state legislation to address one group's struggle while telling the other group to just pull themselves up by the bootstraps reveals the vacuum of empathy that exists in the movement. And ultimately, the us against them mentality is what keeps holding us back. In reality, if either group lose, we both lose. Men and women need each other. And going back to that point about advice, I spent years of my life listening to angry feminists tell me that to approach any woman that I didn't know to strike up a conversation was automatically harassment. So I didn't, until a few years ago. And then I found out that the vast majority of women that I approached were glad that I did, even if a relatively small proportion of those ended in dates. By assuming the very worst from all men, the advice from feminists was, like Bill Burr pointed out, full of shit. So, man or woman, why don't we stop projecting our experiences onto the entire group, quit the oppression Olympics, and focus on having empathy, seeing each other as individual human beings with our own struggles, not some part of some larger club. And then we can start building each other up, sharing the best of ourselves in how we treat other people, the people that we meet every day in our own lives. Thank you very much for listening.